Today on the Transplant Helper, we're going to be talking about the stress that comes with living the transplant life. And today, particularly on this episode, talking about the relational stress that can go with transplant. How do we deal with it? What do we need to do to make our relationships better and to keep them intact? Go ahead and stay tuned. Hey folks, welcome to the Transplant Helper again today. My name is Jim Merle, and today we are going to continue our discussion in talking about the stress that comes with living the transplant life. Now, whether that's the financial stress that we talked about a few weeks ago, the occupational stress we talked about maybe a week or so ago, or the relational stress we're talking about today, all of these things that come about are put together and involved in living our transplant lives. And albeit I'm often the guy who tells people, don't worry, don't stress about it, really in essence, sometimes we do. And particularly when it comes to our relationships, there's oftentimes a little bit, if not a lot of stress that's introduced in those relationships after the time of transplant. So that's what we're really talking about today on this program. Now, when I talk about relationships here, I'm talking about probably mainly this application going to the marital relationship. However, the application also goes out to any relationship. So friends, family members, co-workers, acquaintances, a lot of our relationships change in and around the time of transplant. I think that comes around for a lot of different reasons, but I think mainly it happens because we really don't know how to take one another. And I think even though you may have, like in my case, been married to my wife, I think at time of transplant, maybe like 17 years, or maybe 16. I don't know. But anyway, been married to my wife for a long time at the time of transplant. She knew as well as I knew that after transplant, things were going to be different. Now, we were hoping and praying they were going to be different for all the good things in life. That is a new energy, a new stamina, a new whatever that I gained from having a heart transplant, but also understanding that with all the medication changes, the doctor's appointments, just the worry of being a transplant patient, that was going to change things too. So I know that it has and did, so I thought today would be a good time to sit down and talk to you about my relationship as well as yours, the ones that you have with other people, and how we deal with that. Now, there are basically three things that I want to mention to you today that all help to improve, to benefit, to make better our relationships, and to bring down the stress levels as we're having those relationships. And here's what they are. Most of these will seem very simple to you, and I admit I'm not a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or a counselor, so you're getting this from someone who's just got experience in having been there, done that, and just a regular guy like you are. So here's what we have. Number one, there has to be a great level of communication in order to have a good relationship. You say, oh, well, I knew you were going to go there. That's a part of every discussion when we talk about relationships. That's right. It is. Communication is the key to a good relationship. And I think having open communication, honest communication, consistent communication, almost scheduled communication is a good thing. And that's one thing that it's hard to do sometimes. A lot of times, especially with transplants going on, all these new changes in our life, the one thing that we begin missing is the fact that we're not spending the time using our voices, trying to express our feelings, trying to express our needs to one another, and then in turn getting feedback from our friends, family members, spouses, whoever, on the things that we need. So communication is a huge one. And let me suggest to you that if you're not communicating with those relationships of the past, go ahead and do that. If there's someone in your mind, I see this a lot, especially on Facebook groups. Someone says, you know what, I feel like after transplant, everybody just walked away. Everybody left me. Nobody's contacting me anymore. Nobody ever wants to do anything. I feel like I've lost all my friends. That's probably true. And I know the feeling. Trust me. I'm empathizing. I'm sympathizing with you. But one thing I want you to ask yourself is, what are you doing to keep those relationships going? Have you been the one who called that old friend up just this week and tried to have a conversation? Have you been the one who contacted them? I'm not saying we ought to take all the blame and fault on ourselves, because it's certainly not that. But I think the communication has to be first implemented and instilled in us in order for it to be with them. And then we can only hope and pray that they'll reciprocate that communication to us. So I think communication is a big one. Number two, consideration. And that is, I want you to consider something with me. That is that you know yourself that you're dealing in the transplant life. You're dealing with a lot of unknowns, right? I mean, I've got friends who've had multiple transplants. One guy's had 3 kidney transplants in the past 10 years. And he even tells me that in spite of having been there and done that 3 different times, he says this transplant is different than the others. There are so many variables. There are so many things that have changed. There's so many things about his situation that's not exactly as it once was. He said there's a lot that's not known. I've got a good friend of mine that I mention on the program a lot, Mark A. Barber. You can find him on Facebook. Great guy to follow. Very good motivator, an athlete, a heart transplant recipient, all that. Anyway, that's Mark Barber. But he made a statement one time. He said, you know what, Jim? We live on a razor's edge after transplant between what is good and what is not. And that's certainly true. And so keeping in mind there are a lot of variables, there are a lot of unknown out there. And here's the way you need to apply that. That consideration, what we know about ourselves, has to be given as consideration toward others. Because sometimes the reason people aren't keeping the relationship with us and they aren't keeping up with us is because they do not understand, they don't know what to do, and they don't know what to say. And so us just giving some consideration, saying, you know what, my great friend of the past, Joe Bob Smith, and I'm making up the name, but my great friend of the past, Joe Bob Smith, he and I haven't talked in a number of months, and maybe that's because he doesn't know what to do and he doesn't want to know what to say. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. On the other side of that, keep in mind, and I talked about this on a program recently, that some things about us, and we hate to admit it, it's a hard pill to swallow, but some things about us have actually changed after transplant, even in our mindsets, our attitudes, our outlooks, and all. I hope that we all have positive outlooks, great mindsets, perfect attitudes, but that's not always the case. Sometimes simple medications like prednisone can cause us to think a little bit differently. So consideration is a big part of this. So communication, consideration, and here's the third one here, to keeping a relationship together and lifting some of that stress, and that is conservation. You say conservation, what do you mean? I mean by that conserving your moments, making sure that you're making your moments count. Again, I think that's something that we all talk about. It's easy to talk about. You know what? I'm going to live my life now. I'm going to make every moment count. Well, question is, are you doing that? Are you doing that not only for yourself, but are you doing that in the lives of others? Or are you just spending that, wasteful time in life, not just doing nothing because you don't feel good? I'm not implying that, but doing nothing that really matters, making a difference. That's what's going to matter in the end. I spend a lot of time with my family. I'm around my family a lot. I'm at home. I'm pretty much retired. I'm disabled post-transplant. But when I think about it, even though I'm around my family for the better part of the whole 168 hours of the week or more, I think to myself, and I think, you know what? How many of those moments, and I mean moments, it won't be hours, minutes even, seconds, Jim, are you really taking advantage of? Are you really conserving and making sure that's quality time? Because even though I like to sit down with my children and say, watch a movie on television, we all enjoy that. If I'm honest with myself, that's not the real way to be spending time with other people. And I think you could apply that in your own way, and I hope that you would. I'm not claiming today to have covered all the bases. As a matter of fact, you may look at what I've said today and say, oh, what he said, that doesn't amount to nothing. That doesn't matter. Well, in building good relationships, I think it does. And in building good relationships, you're building a relationship that can stand the test of the strains and the trials and the pressures of life. So I hope that you're trying to do that, whether it's by communication, consideration, or conservation. I hope you're trying to do that. I appreciate you so much for pausing today to be with me on this program. I want to encourage you, if you're someone who is casually watching the program from time to time, and I understand some episodes appeal, some do not, some apply, some don't, but if you're someone who's casually watching random programs, how about go ahead and consider subscribing to this program anyway? It would really help me out a lot. I've kind of got a goal I've got to hit based on what YouTube criteria says now, and that is I need 1,000 subscribers in the next 30 days, and I'm reaching toward that. I'm going to make it eventually, but I need that in order to keep on going on YouTube and them to allow me to continue to use the platform like I am, because all I'm trying to do here is to hopefully to advocate, educate, and motivate you as a transplant patient. And I'm inviting you to be a part of that community by subscribing to this channel. If you've liked this video today, give it a big thumbs up. Leave a comment below. I'd like to hear your story about your relationships, whatever. I just want to be a part of helping your lives. And certainly, I want you to know you're helping mine just by being there. So I want to just remind you, until next time, everybody, always please, even you, stay stronger, friend.